Hi friends, today we will be dipping into this book again, Bread and Wine, that we're looking at for Lent. This is a little snippet from the author Edna Hong, and she calls it a look inside. She says, it is much easier to see spiritual faults in others than it is in oneself. This X-ray look at others is called the naked truth or unvarnished truth. In literature and art, it's called realism. But to spot it in one's own self is not only difficult, but painful. And no one wants to take the descending path to that naked, unvarnished truth with all its unacceptable humiliations. It is much more comfortable to stay on the level of the plain and ordinary, and to go on just plain and ordinary. Yet, it is to this path that Lent invites us. The reason Lent is so long is that this path to the truth of oneself is long and snagged with thorns. And at the very end, one stands alone before the broken body crowned with thorns upon the cross. All alone, with not one illusion or self-delusion to prop one up. Yet not alone, for the Spirit of holiness, who is also the Spirit of helpfulness, is beside you and me. Indeed, this Spirit has helped to maneuver you and me down that dark, steep path to this very crucial spot. But I've been to this place before, the born-again Christian may protest. Of course, the non-Christian and perhaps the brought-up Christian need to be brought to this spot, but of all people, we who are born again should not. Is it not a kind of heresy to say we need to go there again and again and again? Well, Lent would indeed be a futile liturgical farce if the redeemed were henceforth sinless, and if the tides of human nature were not always moving, even the twice-born, who have not shed their human nature in the direction of complacency and taking it all for granted. The tides of God always move in exactly the opposite direction, toward an ever deeper skepticism about ourselves, that we may have all the more confidence in God, toward an ever deeper self-distrust, that we may trust in God all the more. The high tides of human nature, even in the twice-born, move to drown the conscience. As long as the consciences of the born-again are housed in human flesh and bone, they are prone to the sleep of death and need continual rescuing. Later, she says, the purpose of Lent is to arouse the sense of sin, to arouse a sense of guilt for the sin, to arouse the humble contrition for the guilt of sin that makes forgiveness possible, to arouse the sense of gratitude for the forgiveness of sins, and to arouse or motivate the works of love and the works of justice that one does out of the gratitude for the forgiveness of one's sins. And to say it again, this time backward, there is no motivation for works of love without a sense of gratitude. There's no sense of gratitude without forgiveness, and no forgiveness without contrition. No contrition without a sense of guilt, and no sense of guilt without a sense of sin. In other words, a guilty, suffering spirit is more open to grace than an apathetic or smug soul. Therefore, in an age without a sense of sin, in which people are not even sorry for not being sorry for their sins, it is a rather serious predicament. Likewise, an age with a Christianity so eager to forgive that it denies the need for forgiveness. For such an age, therefore, Lent can be scarcely too long. I have found only one religion that dares to go down with me to the depth of myself, wrote G.K. Chesterton. And it is true. No religion dares to take me down to the beginning. Hence, Lent is not a tediously long brooding over sin. Lent is a journey that could be called an upward descent. But I prefer to call it a downward ascent. It ends before the cross, where we stand in the light of a new beginning. So fresh and new, says Chesterton, waxing lyrical, that one can be gray and gouty, but only 5 minutes old. Thank you for reading with me. See you next week.
Hello, friends. So this week I've been thinking about our children and our time with young disciples and how wonderful that time is for Pastor Taylor and me, and how sometimes we can be pretty surprised by the responses that our children have. I don't know how many of you remember this, but when we go from Christmas to the baptism of Jesus, we do that in a period of a week. But in the liturgical year, obviously, we skip over basically 30 years. And I remember one of our kids questioning Pastor Taylor, in essence, at how that time went by so fast. How can Jesus be baptized? He was just a baby last week. So it's amazing to me how their minds work and how they do pay attention to what we're saying. I remember when I was a pastor and a chaplain in Newfoundland with the U.S. Navy, I had a time with young disciples where I talked about the virgin birth, and one very bright little girl, all of 7 years old, looked me straight in the eyes and said, "Well, how can she have had a baby if she's a virgin?" I dodged that, and I basically said, "I think you need to ask your parents about how that happened." Anyway, Pastor Taylor is sharing some pretty significant things the past couple of weeks with you, and again this week. Real food for thought about our Christian discipleship and walk. And it's a little heavy, so I thought I would lighten things up this week by sharing just a few things that about children that I hope will make you laugh. So here we go. So a kindergarten teacher was observing her classroom of children while they drew. She would occasionally walk around to see each child's artwork. As she got to one little girl who was working diligently, she asked what her drawing was. And the girl replied, "I'm drawing God." The teacher paused and said, "But no one knows what God looks like." And without missing a beat or looking up from her drawing, the little girl replied, "Well, they will in a minute." And then there's this. A pastor was giving the children's message during church. For this part of the service, the pastor would gather all the children around and give a brief lesson before dismissing them to children's church, like we do. On this particular Sunday, this pastor was using squirrels for an object lesson on industry and preparation. He started out by saying, "I'm going to describe something, and I want you to raise your hand when you know what it is." All the children nodded eagerly. He continued, "This thing lives in trees." Pause. "And eats nuts." Pause. No hands went up. "And it is gray." Pause. "And has a long bushy tail." Pause. The children were looking at each other, but still no hands raised. "And it jumps from branch to branch." Pause. "And chatters and flips its tail when it's excited." Pause. Finally, one little boy tentatively raised his hand. The pastor breathed a sigh of relief and called on him. "Well," said the boy, "I know the answer must be Jesus, but it sure sounds like a squirrel to me." I hope that made you laugh like it did me. Have a good week this week. Blessings.